The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 52. Bereavement, Befuddlement, and a Birthday. The following week in herbology, reality seemed to stampede into the greenhouse to startle them all from their illusion of safety. All class period he'd been distracted by the three Gryffindors, seated together across the room. Herbology, charms, defense against the dark arts, potions, and transfigurations were Draco's classes that he shared with Potter and Weasley this year, and whilst it was still too much, it was fewer than in years past. So for that, at least, he was grateful. Nothing ruined his mood faster than the bumbling ginger git trying to impress his witch. It was clear from the look of their conversation that Weasley was trying to flirt with her. The fact that Hermione sometimes looked as equally flustered as Weasley did was a bit unnerving. The door to the greenhouse opened, and Madam Hooch stepped in to speak with Professor Sprout. This alone wasn't very unusual, as it was an open secret that the two were romantically involved. But then Sprout was wiping her tears, and taking deep breaths, and walking towards Draco's table, where he sat with Neville Longbottom, Hannah Abbott, and Blaise. "Hannah, can you come with me, dear? I'm afraid there's been... It's your mother, sweet girl." The colour drained from Hannah's face quickly. She dropped the pruning shears she'd been using on her tumbling echinacea. Draco looked up sharply, but Hannah only stared at her head of house in disbelief. "No, no, no!" she said over and over, as though it were the only word she could bring to mind, as if saying it would make whatever had happened unhappen. Draco looked over at Neville, who looked sick to his stomach, breath coming in shallow gasps. Hannah gathered her things and went to the door, held up by Professor Sprout. "You should go too," said a low murmur next to him. He glanced at Blaise, confused that his friend might be talking to him. But Blaise's gaze was fixed on Neville. Neville nodded, locking eyes with both Slytherins for a moment, and then stood resolutely, gathering his own things. Once the sandy-haired Gryffindor had gone, it took some time and much chivying from Madam Hooch to convince the class to resume the pruning process on their tumbling echinacea. What was that about, with Neville? Draco was finally able to ask without attracting attention. "They both had crushes on each other for going on 2 years now," Blaise said simply. "If he can offer some comfort, maybe it will help. Sprout is trying to be strong for her, but Pomona is friends with Hannah's grandmother, and was Mrs. Abbott's godmother." Draco didn't need to guess how Blaise knew all of this. He couldn't have known the relationship, but he could tell that this death had also affected the professor deeply. The following day, in care of magical creatures, Draco still couldn't get the look on Hannah's face from his mind. He kept recalling more small memories. The Abbott family at parties and galas over the years. Mrs. Abbott on platform 9 3/4, seeing her daughter off on September 1st in years past. Hannah, blonde braids swinging round and round in their ballroom dance classes years ago. Had her mother braided her hair for her? Fuck, he had to get out of this maudlin funk. Being outside in the fresh air should have helped. They were discussing ashwinders today, and Draco was heartily thankful that Hagrid had not procured one to show them. But the old oaf's heart didn't seem to be in it. He kept losing the thread of the discussion, looking past the group into the forest. Each time his gaze lingered, the students would take turns furtively looking over their shoulders for approaching danger. When they stopped to read up on the indications and habitats of the snake, Draco went to stand closer to Hagrid. "What's going on, old man? Got another giant hiding in there?" Draco indicated the forest with a tilt of his head. "In a manner of speaking, yeah." But instead of jovial, Hagrid's voice sounded sad, strained. "Me oldest friend lives in there. He's getting old, getting close to the end. And I'm not ready." At this, Hagrid stifled a sob. For a brief moment, Draco thought maybe he meant a centaur. As far as he knew, there were no other sentient, speaking creatures in the forest. But he reminded himself who he was speaking with, and tempered his expectations. Oldest friend. He's an acromantula, Aragog. I brought him up from a babe, taught him to speak, even brought him in a mate, keep him company, make a family. And now he's dying. Draco shuddered. His hatred for spiders was surpassed only by his hatred for snakes. Well, I'm sure he's going to be in a better place. Which was to mean not here any more, Draco left unsaid. I suppose. Hagrid wiped his eyes with the polka-dot tablecloth that he used as a handkerchief. Draco shrugged to himself. Even here, he couldn't avoid discussions of death. Saturday was Quidditch tryouts. Gryffindor had gone first, and Draco and several of the Slytherins sat and jeered like old times as Potter put them through their paces. He noticed that Hermione sat waiting for her friends, looking anxious as they flew. He withdrew his handkerchief. Vinca Major. Worried they're going to crash into each other and flatten each other's faces, because it'll only improve Weasley's looks. Ha ha. No, I was just hoping Ron makes the squad. He won the cup for them last year, you know. Believe me, I know, It was likely my mistakes more than his skill that won that cup for Gryffindor, you know. He looked over at her and caught her laughter. He wrote, You know you look mental, laughing in a handkerchief. She quickly stuffed the bit of cloth into a book, looking around surreptitiously before sticking her tongue out at him with a sly smile. He cocked a brow and smirked back at her, then wrote, Don't worry. McLaggen didn't see any of that. He's busy fixing his hair after he kicked off from the ground. Why would I care about what Cormac McLaggen did or did not see? Well, he's been leering at you since I got here an hour ago. He's a complete tosser, and I say that in total seriousness. If Potter goes with him, he's going to regret it. You heard him bragging about eating doxy eggs for a bet before trying out last year, right? That's because the Weasley twins made the bet with him, so he'd be in hospital during tryouts. That way there was no way he would make the team. They knew better than to put that wanker out on the pitch. Then he realized what he was doing, helping field the opposing team. Let Potter find out the hard way, he thought, and backtracked. On the other hand, never mind. When he causes the rest of the team to quit in disgust, it'll help the Slytherin standings. McLaggen had made his first 3 saves effortlessly. Draco had to admit he was a solid keeper. If only he could keep his mouth shut, his broom in front of the hoops, and his nose out of everyone else's business. His 4th quaffle save was close, but still a good showing. McLaggen smirked brazenly, touching his forehead in a mock salute at the crowd of tittering girls in the stands. Draco looked at Hermione, cocking an eyebrow as if to say, See? They locked eyes for just a moment. Then, as he watched, she slipped her wand a few inches out of her sleeve, performing a series of minute movements. He turned back to watch McLaggen's last shot, and was surprised to see the curly blonde wizard shoot off about 12 feet wide from the right side hoop, as the quaffle sailed through the left one. He locked eyes again with his devious witch, the one who had set fire to a teacher's robes, who had trapped a woman in a jar for who knows how long. He gave her a knowing smirk as she adopted the most innocent smile she could manage. He lifted the handkerchief to his mouth. My, you sly little Slytherin minx. Slytherin tryouts, which were the last of the day, went much as he expected, with one notable addition. Blaise had decided to try out as chaser. His agility and speed made Draco confident that they'd have a good chance at taking the cup this year. You're going to use your mind meld skills to put us on top, right? He asked, as they made their way to dinner, well after most of the other students had finished. To not use them would be illogical, the other wizard replied with a sly grin. As they reached the Slytherin table, Theo dropped a copy of the Evening Prophet in his seat, without a word. Draco's eyes caught immediately upon his last name. He read aloud, quietly. Today, Ministry officials searched Malfoy Manor in an attempt to root out dark artifacts. This second search of the imprisoned Death Eater's residence does not seem to have yielded any new results. Arthur Weasley, of the Office of the Detection for Confiscation of Counterfeit Defensive Spells and Protective Objects, said that his team has been acting upon a confidential tip-off. The other two wizards exchanged looks. "Okay there, Drake?" Theo asked nervously. "Yeah." All of the fun and frivolity of the afternoon on the Quidditch pitch seeped away. It didn't matter that the search of the manor yielded no results. It only mattered that the prophet was simply reporting the facts. Malfoy Manor was the home of a known Death Eater, and no amount of caring about a Muggleborn was going to change that. His handkerchief warmed in his pocket. He automatically looked at the Gryffindor table, but Hermione had apparently already finished and left. He took it out and laid it across his lap, whispering the password around a mouthful of pot roast. "How were tryouts?" He used the handkerchief to wipe a non-existent bit of gravy from his lips. "You're dating a seeker, still. I suppose you read the evening paper." "Yes, I'm sorry. Harry told Mr. Weasley about you going to Knockturn Alley that day that we were doing our shopping, and that you were asking about something that you had that needed repairing. We were able to overhear a bit of you and Mr. Borgin in the shop. I wanted to ask you about it, but I figured your secrecy bond wouldn't allow you to speak of it." Surprisingly, however, he realized that the secrecy bond apparently did no such thing. He supposed because this had been his idea, not Voldemort's, that he was free to speak of it to whomever he liked. But he knew he couldn't. Hermione was far too smart. It would likely only take her a few days of research in that sodding library to find vanishing cabinets mentioned in some obscure reference text. She would be able to deduce that he was trying to form a passageway between Hogwarts and the artifact shop. She would likely turn him in, or even worse, try to help him. And after he did what he had to do, she would never forgive him, or herself if she let it go. Instead, he asked, "Can you meet tonight?" "I can't. A Slughorn invited me to a little get-together." "Ah, yes. The Slug Club. You might want to walk with McLaggen to the party. Poor bloke keeps walking into walls. It's only a matter of time before he tumbles down a staircase. And then how will you feel, my?" "You're hilarious." The year was shaping up to be as difficult as he'd feared. Except for one more brief reprieve on a lovely Thursday evening in the Room of Requirement with Hermione to celebrate her birthday, it had been a rigorous start to autumn. He had gifted her 3 charms for her bracelet, one each to represent their first 3 years of friendship. The first charm was a rose gold pumpkin to represent Halloween, the day they had their first real conversation in that alcove by the charms classroom. Next, a crystal teardrop to represent water, to commemorate their solving of the mystery of the pipes and the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets together. And last, of course, a small silver hippogriff with onyx eyes. Her copper eyes had lit up in delight. "He's adorable. It's Buckbeak in miniature." He kissed her gently, running his hands up and down her back in massaging circles. "I would love to take you away from here. Paris, Rome, Tokyo, wherever you'd like to go. But I think we're stuck here, for now. Just you, me, and this chocolate cake that I asked Dobby to make." She'd laughed deliciously as he pulled out the giant cake from a box beneath the table. They fed each other and themselves bites until they could eat no more. He leaned over to kiss her deeply, this witch he loved so much. "Happy birthday, Mai." Chapter 53. The Backup Plan. By mid-October it was clear that this would be a long and arduous year. Urquhart was running practices 3 nights a week and 2 times on Sunday. For an ordinary Wizarding level student, the bloke had boundless energy. He seemed to run on nothing but coffee, and time spent alone with Pansy. With Snape teaching defense against the dark arts, the Slytherins were finally getting something out of the class. Draco had even heard a couple of seventh-year Gryffindor boys saying that he was even better than their first defense against the dark arts teacher, Professor Louis, who had taught extremely well, but had walked off a cliff in Crete the summer after their first year. He'd been replaced by Quirrell, who'd moved to defense against the dark arts from alchemy studies. The benefit of having a solid defense against the dark arts teacher was that his defense meetings with Blaise and Theo weren't needed, so he had a bit more time for studying. The downside was that Snape and every other professor expected NEWT-level work with every assignment. He was falling far behind in homework for Transfigurations, Herbology, and Divination, and he wasn't sure when he'd catch up. However, he was regularly receiving requests, which read more like demands, from Snape, who wished to speak to him alone in his office. He ignored these. He had a feeling that this was Snape's way of finding out his plans, either to turn him over to Dumbledore, or to steal his supposed glory in the eyes of the Dark Lord. If it was the latter, he could have it all. But Draco worried that Snape was playing both sides of this fight, and would fess up to Dumbledore just to bolster his own credibility. That his father hadn't escaped prison was a minor miracle. Every flu call his mother mentioned the feeling of despair that had settled upon Wiltshire, Diagon Alley, even upon Muggle London the couple of times she had visited. It was only a matter of time before all of the Dementors abandoned Azkaban, and then Voldemort's numbers would double in strength. He wasn't sleeping well. He wasn't eating like he should. He knew his mother was trapped at home with Bellatrix, Peter Pettigrew, and Voldemort in their home, and there was nothing he could do about it. But by far his biggest concern had been the task he was assigned, and how to go about carrying it out. It hung over him like a cloud, raining down worrisome thoughts like storm water that seeped into his mind and body, settled into his bones. A night spent in the library, and no witch to keep him company, Draco thought a bit morosely. He sounded like one of those sad drinking songs that the older Slytherins sometimes broke into when they'd gotten too deeply into the spiced vodka. Hermione was catching up on revision and couldn't be persuaded to work on it with him in the library. "You'll just distract me, and we'll spend an hour snogging in the back of the library, and I won't be able to study." Draco did not see much downside to this, but he had learned not to argue with her, as it usually resulted in her winning anyway. Draco was researching ways to form magical passages. The Vanishing Cabinet was simply decoration, a conduit used to channel the magic of the incantation, much the way a wizard or witch used a wand to channel and direct their magic. The wand in a Muggle hand was little more than a stick. Without the proper incantation, Vanishing Cabinets were merely used to hold bits and bobs that one didn't want lying about. He had absorbed all the information that Borgin had to offer, and had shared with Borgin the little bit that he had found, to no avail. Draco had visited the Room of Requirement, and had seen the Vanishing Cabinet for himself. It was large and black, imposing with its runes carved into the facade. Yet, to open it and look inside, it looked like nothing more than a space for clothes or linens to be stored. It was cracked in places, the wood splintered near the bottom, which was half buried in piles of old cloaks, hats, and jewelry. Imagining the Vanishing Cabinet as a magical conduit had made Draco wonder, why couldn't he use something else that was a conduit for dark magic to accomplish the task set to him? He'd been living under the assumption that Voldemort expected him to confront Dumbledore, to avada him directly. Why not try poison, or just a cursed object? Borgin had cursed objects for sale in his shop. Draco had seen plenty in his visits over the years, and just this past summer had stood less than 3 feet away from a cursed necklace that had killed something like 19 people. Draco pushed aside the book that he'd been reading and drew parchment and quill to him. "Borgin, I am writing to inquire after an item that I've seen in your shop. I wish to purchase it and have it sent to me, but all mail is being searched into the school. Therefore—" A plan was forming in his mind. He would have the necklace sent to the Owl mail office in Hogsmeade, just before their next visit to the village. He would need to figure out a way to deliver it to Dumbledore. Perhaps he could use the polyjuice, so that it wasn't he who was recognized. Or could he convince someone else to be the carrier? He would need to find someone to get it into the castle and give to Dumbledore. Maybe some unsuspecting third year. A girl would be best, because they would be less likely to be searched thoroughly upon their return. Maybe he could just flirt his way into a girl helping him. He was feeling a bit skeezed out just thinking about it. Perhaps he could Imperius someone. After all, the alternative was to Avada someone. Of the 3 unforgivable curses, it seemed like Imperio was perhaps the least unforgivable. Surely killing someone or torturing them was worse than taking away their free will. A shiny button with the letters SPEW flashed in his mind. Draco pushed the thought away. He had to carry out this task to keep Hermione and his mother safe. He justified his plan to himself, even as he addressed his letter and walked to the owlery for Thorn to deliver it. But he had a strong feeling that, to a certain someone, it would not matter what unforgivable curse he would not do. The fact that he was considering any of them meant that it was likely enough that she would never want to speak with him again. "Why do you need to be me again?" Vince asked in his confused, which was to say, his usual voice. Draco sighed. He'd explained this to Vince no fewer than 3 times. He was starting to wish he'd gotten someone else to help him out. He'd landed detention with McGonagall on the first Hogsmeade weekend in mid-November, much to his annoyance. He was assigned to change bedsheets and organize healing supplies in the infirmary, but he really needed to get into Hogsmeade to get that necklace and pass it on to someone who could smuggle it into the castle, to Dumbledore. So he'd paid Vince to pretend to be him, and to get a bit of hair so that he could pose as Vince. He'd given the boy a bit of money, offered to write his next 3 essays, and put in a good word with Astoria for Vince. Personally, Draco felt that getting Vince a chance with Astoria would be nearly as impossible as the 3 essays. Sure, all she was going to do was laugh in Draco's face at the very idea of dating Vince. But Draco was going to have to purposefully dumb down his writing to make those essays believable. "I just need a bit of help, Vince. Please. It's for a special, secret mission." "For him?" Draco nodded. "I need you to do this for me, okay?" "Okay, Draco." Vince yanked a few hairs out of his head, offering them to Draco. He took them carefully, depositing them into the vial he had on his nightstand. It bubbled, then turned a murky mud color. Draco struggled not to pull a face as he picked it up and sniffed it. His own polyjuice had turned a silvery gray. He had no idea it changed, depending upon the person. "Cheers, then," Draco said, appending the vial in his mouth and grimacing involuntarily through the taste. In an instant his skin began to bubble painfully, and he closed his eyes against the pain. He felt himself shrink a few inches, and his belt and shoes began to squeeze his waist and feet. He had put on his largest pair of trousers in preparation for this, but he had forgotten to loosen the belt. He towed off the tight shoes as quickly as he could, reaching for his belt just as the buckles snapped off. "Give me your belt and shoes, mate," Draco wheezed, kicking over his own shoes to the other wizard. It was surreal seeing himself outside of a mirror, standing. He sincerely hoped to never see that goofy, confused expression on his own face again. The 2 wizards exchanged items and robes, and Draco grabbed his money pouch from the bedside table, saluting Vince one last time. Thanks again, mate. Remember, you need to be in the hospital wing in 10 minutes. Take another big sip when your watch chimes. And try not to talk too much." It didn't matter that a person's voice changed to resemble the person they were pretending to be. Anyone who had 1 minute of conversation with Vince, pretending to be Draco, would likely realize that this was not Draco. The other Draco nodded and plodded to the door, running his hands through his hair as he walked. Draco had a weird feeling that Vince was going to enjoy this experience a lot more than he was. He stepped out of the door as Vince, nearly bumping into Greg as he did so. "What's taking you so long? You and Malfoy fixing your hair?" "Sod off, Greg." Greg's eyebrows climbed into his hairline. Okay, don't get your knickers in a scramble." Draco hurried through the door, down the stairs, and through the common room. He was nearly out of the door, into the corridor, when he realized that he was alone. He looked behind him, and Greg had barely made it to the middle of the dormitory staircase. "Slow down, you prat. You know I can't walk that fast with my bunion," Greg whinged. "Why don't you just hex it off?" Draco grumbled. "It just keeps coming back," Greg said forlornly. 10 minutes later, they had finally made it to the walking path to Hogsmeade. Draco sincerely hoped that he'd brought enough polyjuice for this trip. He hadn't accounted for a slow walking companion, and now that he thought about it, his own knee joints were already killing him. He really needed to encourage bacon and eggs to work out more. "I just need to stop in here for a package," Draco said to Greg, indicating the Owl post office. "I'll see you in the Three Broomsticks. Order me a chocolate stout." "Branching out a bit, mate. You usually get a banana split, chocolate cake, and a glass of milk." Draco's stomach turned at the thought of eating all of that only an hour after full English. "Just get the stout." Greg lumbered off towards the pub, chortling about Vince's new diet. He picked up the heavy paper-wrapped package, feeling the necklace shift inside the paper. It made him nervous to hold it. Now that he was actually implementing this plan, he wasn't sure if he could go through with it. The pub was full of raucous students and a handful of professors, as well as the various witches, wizards, and warlocks living in or visiting the village. He made his way to the other Slytherins, staring across the pub a little too long at Hermione, who looked startled to have caught Vince's eye. She was sitting with Potter and Weasley. Potter looked especially annoyed about something, which wasn't so unusual. Scarface had a hard time masking his emotions. "Bacon!" Theo called jovially as he neared, raising his chocolate stout for good measure. Draco decided to have a bit of fun with Theo. "Thanks, mate, but you know I didn't invent the scientific method, right?" Blaze choked, oniony gilly waters shooting from his nose. By the time Theo picked himself up off the floor where he'd fallen down laughing, Blaze had mostly recovered, and Draco was half finished with his stout, careful to avoid Blaze's gaze and keep his occlumency in place. "Gotta piss," he said, picking up the package carefully. "Got your makeup in there, Vince?" Greg asked. Since when had he become witty? "Why? Do you need to borrow it?" Draco deadpanned. He left the rest of the group in a fresh round of guffaws, heading for the loo in back. Madame Rosmerta was just coming up the stairs, heading to the cellar, carrying a small barrel of fire whiskey. It was perfect timing. Draco had already decided that she would work best because she could continue acting as a lookout in the future. "Imperio," he said firmly, pointing his wand at her. Her eyes went wide and blank. Draco knew that he would need to maintain eye contact whilst he was giving instructions, but it felt so odd to look the witch in her deadened, blank eyes, when she ordinarily seemed so sparkly and bubbly. "You will find a young witch from Hogwarts in the toilet. Use the Imperious Curse on her. Give her this. Do not open it or touch it." He held out the package, and Rosmerta grasped it willingly. He worried that she would inadvertently touch it herself. then wondered how he would feel with 2 deaths on his conscience. As it was, he was performing an unforgivable curse, and was telling someone else to perform an unforgivable curse on another person. This was all so fucked. "Tell her to give it to Dumbledore when she returns to Hogwarts. Tell her it's a gift for him. Tell her to tell no one who it is for." Rosemary nodded blankly. "A gift for Dumbledore?" she parroted. "Yes." His voice cracked slightly, so he cleared his throat. "Take this coin, and keep it with you in your pocket. If it turns hot, read the edge. I'll contact you if I need you. I'll use the coin." "If it turns hot, read the edge." The witch's blank eyes and steady voice made this so difficult. Draco fought to hold eye contact. "Tell me if you see Dumbledore here in the village. Just hold the coin with both hands and talk to it. When I leave here, you will not be able to recall this conversation." Rosemary nodded again. She put the fire whiskey barrel on the ground and walked into the ladies' lavatory. Draco rushed back into the pub area, fighting the bile that threatened to force his stout back up his throat and out onto the pub floor. Tossing a half-hearted wave to the Slytherins in the corner, he hurried out the door and ran up the walking path to the castle as fast as Vince's body would allow. He checked his watch. Only about 7 minutes remaining before the polyjuice wore off. Filch's search was thorough, and Draco willed himself not to push the old man to get past him. He hurried down the stairs to the dungeons, hotly pursued by Peeves, who tossed eggs at him and cackled, "Bacon is looking overcooked. Need some eggs, Bacon?" His skin bubbled again just as he crossed the threshold into the common room, which was thankfully only populated by a handful of younger students. "Okay there, Malfoy?" a second year asked uncertainly. "Your skin?" Scintillating solution. Got too much toad saliva in it. Gives you warts for a bit," he ground out. Then he promptly threw up all over the plush green carpeting, splashing sick all over the second year's shiny black loafers and Vince's boat-sized shoes that his less plump feet now swam in. Girding his trousers around his waist and mumbling an apology, he vanished the sick and shuffled up the stairs to his room. 30 minutes later, Vince lumbered back in as Draco. "Some second year wants me to buy him some new shoes," Vince said bemusedly. Draco noticed that his platinum hair on Vince's head was parted differently than he normally wore it. He didn't like it. "No, he wants me to buy them. I'll pay him at dinner," Draco said tiredly. "How was detention?" "Folded lots of sheets. I think I rolled about 1,000 bandages, too. How was your mission?" Draco heaved a sigh. "I guess we'll find out soon enough." Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great 78.